Let me go ahead and introduce Ed. So I think it was 1998, Ed, when I met you, and my husband told me about this guy at work who had a fabulous, huge rainwater cistern underneath his house with fish for yard and garden irrigation. So he also used it for creative, fun water play features for his children, which was really neat to see. Ed uses his creativity and engineering skills for good causes, and tonight he's going to tell us how he delved into increasing the awareness and the use of native plants around Austin, Texas. And hopefully, I did start that by saying you're talking to us from Austin, Texas. All right, thanks, Ed. I'll let you share your screen. And
I don't know.
You can turn off the sharing if you want us to see you. Then that's
Okay, just turn off the sharing.
yeah, and that way we can just see each other's faces while we discuss it.
Stop share. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Well, so in Austin, Texas, back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, the community was very into nature and the environment, and um, there was a lot of effort made to protect wilderness areas around Austin. When our neighborhood was platted, their strategy at that time was to set aside a portion of each neighborhood to be a natural area and not developed, and that the neighborhood would take care of it. And they prohibit impervious cover, that sort of thing. Well, it immediately, of course, became overrun with invasives and ended up not being anything like what they were envisioning in terms of a wildlife sanctuary. And eventually, they realized that was a losing strategy, and they went to a very extensive preserve system financed by millions of dollars of bonds. And now they charge developers fees to offset those bonds. And the way they protect nature is by managing with biologists and whatnot these large preserves of public and some private property north of town mostly. But our neighborhood was developed when everybody got their own little pocket park. And we have a 13-acre forest that has about 400 feet of frontage on Lake Austin, which is a constant level lake in town. It's the one that if you're rich, you want to live on that one. And so we're super lucky that our park has a little bit of lakefront there. We also have a total of almost a mile of hiking trails that we maintain. And nobody was really doing much of anything with it except just walking through it. When it, I took a habitat stewards class, which is taught by the National Wildlife Federation, and they emphasize the importance of removing invasives and restoring wildlife areas, rewilding areas. And they're particularly interested in locating people that can reach out in their community and have access or influence over particularly private natural areas, private forests, because the public areas, there are already methods of approaching, the city about, and that's already underway. It's a little hard to influence that, I think. But if you've got a little pocket park and nobody's paying attention to it, that was exactly what they were hoping to find, somebody that knew about that situation. So they were very excited to have me in their class, and I learned a lot about removing invasive species from them. Now, I realized that 13 acres is way more than I could do by myself, and it's not exactly like everybody would be cool with me just running around cutting down a bunch of trees and bushes. So I had to educate people, and fortunately, I had a neighbor that was very sympathetic to the cause, and he was actually the one that thought the neighborhood might be ready for killing off invasives. Some people love all plants and they don't want to kill invasives. So we presented a project. At the time, it was just a limited scope. There was one area that had a lot of ligustrums, and we said, let's remove all of those. And we scrounged up a grant from the Native Plant Society and some neighborhood money to buy some plants to put in, and we planted about 500 small plants. Mostly we plant 1 gallon and 4-inch plants because we find that they survive better than planting big ones when you can't really water them as much as you would like. So few years further on, I started mapping our park and came up with a rough estimate that we needed about 20,000 plants. And I thought, well, gosh, I'm never going to convince them to spend that kind of money. And even if I did, uh, would there be enough enthusiasm to plant these plants that I went out and bought? I mean, I just felt like there needed to be kind of participation from the community for it to be successful. And so I presented a proposal around 2016. It was just about 3 years after we started to build a small nursery in our forest. And we're really lucky that we have a spring-fed creek, very small creek, that we're able to harvest some water from. And for that to be legal, I have to have a Lower Colorado River Authority raw water contract so that I can draw groundwater in the Colorado watershed. And I did that, $100 a year. So we get a 250,000 acre feet, oh no, sorry, 250,000 gallons a year, 3/4 of an acre foot of water a year. And on many occasions, some naysayers have challenged us and accused us of stealing water. And I'm able to, of course, say, well, no, we're following all the rules and, got a water contract. I give you the people to call if you want to talk to them. So everything has to be done, like, I think, above board and very visibly. Otherwise, it looks like something sneaky going on. Uh, Most people were pretty willing to accept, at least in a general sense, that environmental principles are really good. And I know you experience that too, probably, but they don't really know much what to do and they need some guidance. And so I suggested that we build this nursery, and I proposed the cost would be $2,000, and it was built for about two-thirds of that. And it has enough space for us to grow about 1,000 4-inch pots each year. Um, we we collect seeds on the property and plant those. We take cuttings, and I have a mist hood at home that I get those rooted in. And then when they have roots, we move them back over to the neighborhood nursery to plant that fall. And we're still just finishing up. We were planting some earlier today. So to persuade people that we needed to focus our effort on this subject, restoration, there was a lot of people that wanted to turn our park into, like, what I consider a country club. They wanted to bring in electric lighting. They wanted to have boat docks. They wanted to have, fire pits, barbecue serving tables, patios, pergolas, irrigation systems, lawns. And it was obvious that what they were trying to do was to build a party facility basically on the lake. It's a great idea, but we felt this property was not really appropriate for that. So rather than just say, don't do that, don't build this, don't build that, I felt it was important to come to the neighborhood with a positive, something that we can do. We can restore this, we can repair the damage. And so that was the kind of language I used when I was presenting this to the neighborhood. And there were a lot of people who supported the idea, and we had enough money. So we got approval and built the nursery. And since that time, we've probably planted about 7,000 or 8,000 plants, something like that. So it's, I think we were really lucky that we had a creek nearby, because we could continually gather water from the creek to keep our tanks full. And when the creek does go dry, which is very rare, but it does occasionally go dry, at least we can get another month or so out of our tanks. And if push comes to shove, we can pay somebody to drag a hose over there and fill them up. But we haven't had to do that yet.
Hey, Ed,
Yeah.
when you're planting these thousands of plants, is this all in your 13-acre park, or are these residential? Are you getting neighbors to use them in their own yards as well?
Well, in order to make it more attractive for people to approve this, and because I had been advised that sharing plants will really stimulate interest, I recommended to the neighborhood that we allow people, volunteers, to take some plants home to plant them in their yard. And that's something that a lot of people really enjoy. I think that what makes them appreciate the plant, not so much as the fact that it's free, because I've learned that if you just hand out plants and pots and give them to people, the city told me they had the same experience. People just stick it on their back porch and forget about it and it dies. But if you tell them a story about it, that it's rare, or which part of the state it's from, a few pieces of information like that, they value it. And so I think that the story that you tell with the plants is really critical. Education, in other words, which is obviously what you guys are all over with your project.
Yeah.
The volunteers, neighbors do come help. It's a lot of times the same kind of group, but we have a dozen or so people that often come help. Originally, I think it was even more than that, and I probably need to do a little more work to scrounge up some new people. We've had a lot of turnover in the neighborhood, but that's all part of our education effort. In order to kind of complement the planting and to reinforce the idea that our neighborhood does this kind of thing, I've held a couple of events in the park, and these were real fun. We had a bunch of neighbors volunteer to do different things, and one neighbor volunteered to have a table with nature art. So they brought a lot of paper and colored pencils, and they would encourage them to go collect leaves and draw pictures of the leaves, And then we had a fossil bone table where we found out one of our neighbors owns a 30-pound mammoth tooth that she dug in her sister's yard. And so she brings that. So we were able to, there was another couple that has a butterfly garden project down there. And so I gave them some plants, and some kids could go plant in the butterfly garden. So we do these kind of events. And if one of the participants is not able to make it, we don't have to cancel. We still have a lot of stuff to do. And this year, the spring, we're thinking of doing it again. And we probably are I can invite a birder friend to do a bird hike. We got a neighbor who wants to do a plant hike. We should have somebody with young kids go show everybody all of our trails. And so it becomes a real park focused event, and it makes people enjoy it for what it is and not regret that it doesn't have lighting. So that's another aspect of what we're doing. We have a lot of trouble with people coming in and cutting stuff to try and get a view of the lake. We have people, I don't want to dwell on this, but I think that I've run into a number of people in the neighborhood who are afraid of snakes and maybe bugs or nature in general. And I'm not criticizing these people, because this is an instinctual fear. And anybody that's ever experienced an existential fear knows how serious that is. And almost nobody is going to just come right out and tell you they have a paralyzing fear of snakes. Instead, they're just going to ask you to mow more. And so I've found that there's some people that you're just never going to win them over, because they just can't go in a place like our common area without fear unless they exercise some control. And that control might be mow the sides of the road at least 10 feet, And if you do that, at least they feel like they can see the snake before they step on it. So I don't know how you really deal with that, except to just recognize it's going to happen and try not to get it, too caught in that, because those discussions can never go anywhere, because they can't tell you the real reason that they want to do stuff. So it's best to just kind of let those suggestions slide, I think. Another thing we've learned is that if you don't demonstrate care over your property in some way, if it's you need to fence it, you need to have to control access, you need to stop people who are doing work without permission. The folks with the city told me something that I thought was really fascinating. They have these grow zones where they'll have a creek, and they don't want to waste money mowing it. And let's say this creek is fairly small. It might be deep, but it doesn't carry a lot of water. So they know they can let plants grow up in it without impairing its function. And they say, okay, this will be great for critters. We'll have volunteers come through, remove all the invasives. We'll get a bunch of native plants growing in these ditches, and the critters can hide there. But what they found was that neighbors kept coming across the street. They were angry that the city wasn't mowing their creek. They would mow the other creek in the next neighborhood, but not this one. And so they would get angry and they would take their mower over there and they'd mow it. And the city would have a sign that said grow zone, but they said that what really keeps people from mowing is for the city to mow a narrow strip around the edge of the grow zone itself, which makes no sense as far as maintenance of the grow zone goes, because it just makes it a tiny bit smaller. But what it does is it marks it as yours. You're maintaining it, and people can see that, and they might not like how little you're mowing, but they realize you're in charge of it. And that discourages people from messing with it. Odd as that sounds. We've managed to have zero mowing along the side of our asphalt park road. We have had people want to mow a little bit, but we keep asking why. And, you can drive a car down there. So what more do you need? But anyway, there's you mentioned in here the interplay with deer. That is something I've learned about. I discovered after I got into plants that our property not only has got native plants on it, it's actually quite unique because it does have a spring, which is pretty rare. And the creek bed in our park is very steep, and deer just hate steep hills that are rocky. One biologist told me that deer have if they break their leg, they're dead. And so their legs are fragile. So they're actually quite sort of instinctively aware of the need to protect their legs. And so they don't go in uneven ground, and they don't walk through sticks and things like that. So the deer never got in there. And then when they started raising cattle, cattle and deer apparently eat, kind of similar plants. The cattle came in, ate up everything, but the cattle didn't go down in the creek either because they don't like steep hills. In the 1950s, when they got rid of the screwworm in the US, the deer population across the country exploded because the screwworm larva was a predator for deer and significantly reduced the deer population, apparently, because when they got rid of it, the deer exploded. And so this explosion of deer that came because of human removal of the screwworm and the introduction of cattle in Texas wiped out any plant that deer and cattle like to eat. And I have a list that this biologist produced of plants by palatability to deer. And he's working on a 100-acre ranch that started out at a level 1.5 on this scale of palatability. And he said after 30 years of landscape techniques, mowing schedule changes, some seeding, they don't do a lot of hand planting, it's just too much land. They've managed to raise the level of the quality up to about 2.5 on the scale. And when you look at the plants on that list, the thing that kind of blew me away was that our park is filled with stuff that's level 3, 4, and we have most of the plants that are labeled number 5 on his list. One he put on there as number 5 is just practically non-existent. It's so rare. We don't have that one. But our property is a solid level 5, which means that the biologists walk into it and they immediately recognize that it's different. I mean, one of them walked inside the gate and went, "Wow." And I said, what are you seeing, already? And they said, "Look at the understory, how thick it is." The deer ate up the whole understory and the cattle did. And then they expected to find rare plants, and they did. So I've actually had biologists call me up and ask me to give them tours of the property. They were looking for certain plants. I've had biologists call and ask for samples of plants to propagate into preserves in town. And so it just turned out by coincidence that our park actually is quite unique and valuable and rare. And we're lucky that enough neighbors recognize that to support the effort to do the restoration work. Yeah. So did you have questions? I don't want to get into too much on hardware unless you've got people interested in the equipment I use for propagation, which is something the nursery on the side of the creek is really just what you might imagine. It's a few tables. We've got water tanks. We do have a solar panel. You've got to have a battery or solar panels and a pump. So you've got to have somebody that's handy with gardening type plumbing work to put something like that together.
So, in general, you started out with only one comrade, right? One neighbor that kind of had this vision. And what would you say picked up the momentum to get more and more? What were the most important aspects of getting people on board?
Well, a lot of people have heard that invasive species are bad, and quite a few of them couldn't identify a single invasive species, and they have them growing all over the yard, but they know they're not good. Um, and so I think everybody in the neighborhood kind of was sympathetic to the idea of protecting nature. And I did, have I identified a few other people, pretty quickly, people that show up to the volunteer events. They, they can be solicited to help. One lady that I attended to talk one time about how to get people to volunteer said that really you need to ask people directly, not just like send out an email saying, can you do this? But when you meet them in person or when you're talking to them on the phone, you need to say, we're going to be doing this next Saturday afternoon. Can you come and join us? And maybe that's putting people on the spot, but they can always say no. And you'll get a lot more people show up than if you just send out a blanket email. So we did have a few people show up. And then, I don't know, remember exactly, I guess the fact that it was so new and novel, we had, I think, 24 people show up to one event. Now it's a lot more often for there just to be, 3 or 4 people. And the faces will rotate over the months. But and then I guess for the last 5 years or so, I post things on the neighborhood website often about the plants that are growing in the common area and get good feedback on that. But we've tried to be real inconspicuous about the work by doing it mostly during the week when people are at work and not walking through the woods. I don't want them to get used to seeing people in the woods cutting down trees, right? But I have to go through the woods and cut down trees. So I learned a lot about herbicide application to remove nandinas and ligustrums in particular. And I've met folks that work for the city of Austin, biologists who gave me advice on removing invasives in wilderness or wild areas. So a lot of people have helped me and taught me. And so now I, share that information with others. But so we didn't upset anybody by removing the ligustrums. It's amazing how many trees ligustrums can just die out in the middle of the woods and fall over, and people just don't notice. As long as they don't see somebody cutting them down and falling to the ground. And then of course, a lot of neighbors, they just support it in principle. They never even go down to the common area and visit. So it's been enough support. It's not like the neighborhood identity, exactly. Although quite a few people in the neighborhood would say that the best thing about the neighborhood is our neighborhood park. they just love it because they just want to go out and run through nature, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it takes a lot of effort and thought to get a project to appeal to people. Um, and especially when you're asking for their dues to be used to pay for the stuff. Um, so we kept the costs pretty low. I said $2,000 for the original nursery, but the budget after that has been $300 a year, and we typically spend less than half of that. So we've just tried not to do anything objectionable. And then you know, I do mention the plants a lot on the neighborhood website, what we're planting, and I announce events so that people can know that it's happening. I think it's a big mistake to just go around privately and round up people and do it behind the scenes. I think it needs to be done visibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, if any other homeowners associations around Austin have copied this idea of having it, you know, propagating their own plants and
Not that I know of. Now, well, there's a neighborhood. I don't know the name of the neighborhood. There's a city park near their house, near their neighborhood called Patterson Park, and there was a fellow from that neighborhood. I forget his name. He came to the Native Plant Society meetings for a while because he was working turning that into a garden space. They got approval from the city to convert some tennis courts that weren't used very much into a garden. So it was subdivided public gardens. And they needed, of course, to have pathways through the gardens, and they wanted to have some landscaping around the edges of the space and along the walkways and all, so that it wasn't just a sea of little rectangular gardens. And so that was a neighborhood project. The neighborhood paid for it, I think. I don't believe the city donated very much money, and they found a lot of help. I found a pawpaw tree for them, which around here is not easy to do. So you know, they've got some really cool plants. I do know another neighborhood that has an even better natural area than we have, Barton Creek West, which you may remember is southwest town out in that extremely precious Barton Creek recharge zone.
Mhm.
And they actually own 200 acres of what is part of the Barton Creek Greenbelt, which is as prime as natural territory gets in the city of Austin. Barton Creek is really, really special. And but they don't have a growing operation. And as far as I know, they're not doing anything specific involving invasive removal. But
well, we have a with ECOS a Healthy Yards task force, and you know, we talk about different things that we might do to convince residents, you know, first of all, not to plant these Japanese knotweed and other invasives, and also to, you know, steer towards native plants. But in general, homeowners associations, you know, the last one before I moved here, anything you can do that is environmentally terrible was the rule with the homeowners association. I mean, it could be anything from you can't dry your clothes outside, you must use your clothes dryer. Like, you know,
right.
so they are notoriously very difficult. So, you know, I'm very impressed that you kind of stepped in and changed the direction and of
Well,
yours.
the city of Austin laid down a rule many years ago, decades ago, I believe, that says that if your yard is native plants and they are maintained in a manner that is appropriate for maintaining native plants, which, you know, the way they've been maintained for thousands of years before we showed up is considered normal maintenance for native plants. That's acceptable to the city. Now, if it's all grown up in ligustrums and nandinas and it's just obviously not cared for, you might not have any support for that. But if the city comes over, they want, in the city of Austin, they want people to support wildlife. They want to have a variety of plants. If somebody came over and reported me for the water contract violation, and when the guy came over to do the inspection, he saw what we were doing. He was so excited. He said,
Uh-huh.
"Oh, this is exactly what we want people to be doing with watersheds, is, vegetating the sides of the creeks." And so, uh, if you're sincere and you're doing the right thing, you present it to people, and usually they'll go along with it. At least in Austin. Um, so yeah, you can have our front yard. We don't have a speck of grass in it, and I have over 50 different species of plants in the front yard. Most of my neighbors have like four.
Right.
And we have armadillos and possums and raccoons and all kinds of critters running around in our front yard. Coyotes, I've seen coyotes in there, and deer. So it's doing its job.
We don't get too many armadillos up here.
Yeah. As far as yeah, the a lot of people do like for their yards to be really neat. And
Mm.
that's where I think it's important, instead of saying don't mow, don't weed eat, don't do this, it's important to say, if you want to attract butterflies to your yard, this is what you have to do. If you want to support pollinators, or if you want to have more birds, everybody loves birds, right? uh, they birds eat insects, they eat fruit, they eat all kinds of plant material. And so plantings, focusing on the benefit for birds and butterflies and things like that, I think is your best bet.
So Margie in chat said, what again is the name of this park? I'm not sure if you caught in the beginning, Margie, this is the homeowner association park. So
Yeah, it doesn't actually have a name. It's two separate lots that are adjoining, and the homeowner association owns both of them. They have deed restrictions, and they're zoned to prohibit impervious cover. They're pretty steep hills, and not really buildable anyway. That's why the developer chose that area. And it's just a shocking coincidence, really, that it's got so many rare plants in it. Uh, like the Mexican um, plum tree is a level 5 palatability. Deer will eat it down to the ground. And if you go around in the unfenced preserves where deer are present, you will not find any Mexican plums younger than like 40 years old or something like that. And they're really worried that when the old ones die off, there won't be any more. Well, we've planted a few Mexican plums, and they did fine. And a couple of years ago, I noticed a Mexican plum that we did not plant sprouted on its own. It's 6 feet tall. And I have a ton of biologists that come through that have never seen an indigenous, naturally occurring Mexican plum that size.
hmm.
So that I'm lucky. I can really brag about some stuff like that, and our neighbors can go like, "Wow." Um, so that I think has helped. The fact that it really is not just a bunch of brush and weeds.
Right. Wow. Well, I like the addressing the psychology of it, right down to the snakes, and addressing what people's reservations really are, whether they speak it out loud or not. And definitely the concept, it's interesting about they believe it's maintained if you just mow the exterior of it. These are all interesting points.
Yeah, and we haven't literally mowed around the edge. We do mow the entrance by the street where we wish grass would grow. Nothing grows there, but yeah, we do try to make the maintenance visible, though. That's, like I said, I advertise it on the website, and when we plant things, we put pin flags in the ground so people can see where we've been. And um, we were just planting along an area where we have people outside the neighborhood association that like to dump trash and cut plants in that area. And I made a point to tell a couple of them that I know, I'm friends with. I said, "Yeah, we're going to put in some nice flowers for you down here." And they're like going, You can see them kind of hesitate. Um, but we're just marking our territory, is what we're doing, you know?
Those are good points. Does
Yep.
anybody else want to just unmute and have any other questions about Robert?
Right. Um, well, there's a couple of different things. Do you have any recommendations, besides the putting in plants? Um, I'm retired for a number of years now, and I've gotten interested in gardening, and have tried to. I have a small uh, piece of land in Schenectady. It's on a hillside, um, and the back third of the property grows. Well, I guess they're considered weeds, goldenrod,
Hmm.
that gets to be 6 to 8 foot tall. Um,
Right.
and that's the back third of the property is uh, that. But I came across this notion of it's related to sustainable gardening. It was called something like forest gardening. It's a notion about being able to put a set of plants together that will support each other so that there's relatively little maintenance, and
Right.
the it takes it like almost takes care of itself.
Right.
And
Right. Yeah. In Central Texas, we have a tree that a lot of people love to hate. They call it the cedar tree. It's actually an ash juniper. It's not a cedar. Uh, and and it does cause an allergy. A lot of people have cedar fever that is just horrible in December and January. And I really do feel bad for the people that have cedar fever. I'm really lucky I don't. That particular tree is a cornerstone in our ecology because the needles from the tree produce a very acidic soil, and the pH can vary 3 or 4 points from the surface and down several inches. And there's a lot of seeds that are dependent upon that pH level. It's widely believed that you cannot get a Texas madrone seed to germinate unless you have it heavily mulched with decomposing cedar mulch to raise the acidity. And so there's beneficial organisms. Some plants won't grow without them, like the Texas bluebonnet. You can throw seeds out in your yard and you might get a little weak plant to show up, but you will not get them to grow vigorously and reproduce unless you have this particular soil microorganism. I forget the name of it, which you can buy. When you buy a bluebonnet in a pot, the pot contains that organism and you put it in the ground. And so transplanting bluebonnets and buying them in pots work way better than seed.
Hmm.
Uh, I've transplanted rusty black haw viburnums, and rusty black haw viburnums apparently will not continue to grow, much less germinate, unless they're in soil from the parent site.
Hmm.
I had a 15% survival rate of 400 seedlings one year. And the next year I went back and got the other 200 seedlings, and I had an 85% survival rate because I used 1/4 of the soil mix was dirt from under the parent plant. So I'm guessing that the rusty black haw viburnum is very dependent upon an organism. And anybody that is going to grow one of those, I'm saying, find some dirt from the parent tree, try it. There's a trick for most seeds, as you know, but to your point of diversity, that's really what I shoot for. The goldenrod in and of itself isn't a bad thing, I don't think. But it'll sure help other stuff get started faster if you pull a little bit of it out and push the other stuff in at the same time.
yeah.
Um,
Well, related to that, another question that I have is about, do you have any recommendation as far as additives? I saw I was on the internet, and it's hard to know about information on the internet, how accurate it is, but it talked about 5 different additives to soil that would help plants live longer and be better. One of them I hadn't heard of before is called biochar,
yeah, yeah,
and it's supposed to be uh, it's wood or plant material that is burned, but
it's
in low
charcoal.
oxygen,
Hmm.
and it produces a structure that is supposed to be good for microorganisms to live in, so that once you add it to the soil, it keeps the microorganisms there for more years because
Hmm.
of the structure of the, I'm not sure. I got some this year, but and I haven't used it yet. I plan to try it in the spring. But
Well, everybody has their own soil mixture recipe, and a friend of mine who was an author who passed away a couple of years ago used to tell me a soil recipe that contained basically a little bit of every soil that you ever heard of. Um, I try to be a little more targeted than that. Um, one of the things that I really emphasize around Texas, we have really sweet soil because of all the limestone, and that inhibits the ability of plants to absorb iron. And so I put about 1% by weight ironite in my soil mix. So it's mixed up in the dirt. And I've never had any chlorotic looking plants since I did that. Somebody once said, "Gosh, these plants are awful yellow, Ed. You should put ironite in your soil mix." And so I'm always going to put ironite in the soil mix. Um, my soil mix contains 1/5 or 20% leftover dirt. 20%, I need to be able to, it's hard to find leftover dirt. So I go out and buy this high drainage mix called Thunder Dirt, 20% of that, 20% cedar needles and cedar shredded bark that's been sifted because of the acidity that it provides. And the fibers give a really good texture to the mixture. Instead of just being like a pile of sand like this, you can stick a shovel in it and you get a big pile on top of the shovel. It holds together. It's amazing how much the fibers do. 20% of my mixture is coir fiber, just the ground up stuff, and 20% is compost. So it is very, very heavy on the organics, um, compost, cedar needles and fibers, um, and then the coir fiber. But the coir fiber, honestly, is just to make it a little lighter, and it's one of the cheapest ingredients you can buy, and it helps it drain. Doesn't really provide much nutrition, but it does guarantee that it doesn't get soggy, and that's real helpful.
is
Yeah.
one more related question about, like you mentioned about what the soil is like in Texas. Um, I saw a recommendation about getting soil tested, and I just wonder how and I haven't had my soil tested to see what other, additives might be beneficial for it to
Mhm.
grow a variety of plants, or how I would have to amend if I get a particular plant and my soil is such and such, what I would have to add to make that particular plant grow better.
Mhm.
Um, but the other thing is, like in um, well, how many samples would you need? Can you just take one sample from the middle of a property, or if you need to get soil analyzed, is there any kind of rule as far as how many samples you need to get an accurate picture?
I mean, sampling is a big subject. I would really kind of question the value of the test, and I'll tell you why. I know a guy who does happen to be in the Native Plant Society of Texas, the Georgetown chapter, and he's a pecan farmer. I think he's retired, but he has a bunch of pecan trees, and he's got a tractor, and he gets to gather those things up every year. And he said that they spray zinc, they do all kinds of things. Um, uh, this guy Dennis concluded that there was only one measure of soil quality that he was going to pay attention to, and that was the biological content of the soil. I don't know what they call that exactly, but um, if your soil is heavily mineral soil, sandy, gravelly, then that's not uh, going to have much biological content. And he said that what he tries to do is maximize the health of the soil. He doesn't actually, I mean, he can look at his pecan poundage, but that's not what he's basing his decision on. It's the measurement of the biological content. And uh, another guy that I've known for a long time through canoeing actually also happens to be a pecan farmer and knows Dennis. And he went over to Dennis's place one time, and he said his mind was just blown. He's used to seeing the way he just mulches his own orchard heavily with city cuttings, from shredders and chippers. It's cheap, readily available. The city drops it off, and he spreads it under his trees, and they love it. He went to Dennis's place, and it was a giant field of clover. And then he saw how green it was, and Dennis told him about the health of the soil. And now this guy Troy Swift will go all over the country, man. He's just preaching regenerative agriculture. He's and it's all basically focusing on organic content of the soil. I don't know what the phosphorus, magnesium, what all that. I don't know what values to choose, but if you've got a lot of organic content in the soil, it's going to hold water like a sponge. It's going to have tons of microorganisms that are going to produce food for your plants. Um, I love fish emulsion fertilizer as much as it stinks. I mean, plants just love it. So that would be my suggestion is if you look at anything, just look at the biological content of the soil, and you can kind of look at the soil and tell if it's good or not just by eye. So amend it with as much organics as you can, wood chips, mulch.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're around here, Schenectady, at least in this unit, my yard is completely clay. Yeah, almost no organics, pH of like 5, like
Ooh.
almost no sand. That's what we're starting with.
Yeah,
Oh,
I would think you just want to till in a bunch of wood. There's what do they call it? It's a German term, Huygen culture or something like that. It's permaculture. They actually bury rotting wood in the ground to inject microorganisms and to add void space. And so if you've got soil that's just terrible, um, I wouldn't buy a bunch of good quality soil because somebody had to make that out of the cheapest stuff they could find. I would just get organic material and force it into the soil somehow. And it's going to look like crap for a while, but eventually it'll break down, and then you'll have great loose soil at that point. So
um, one on the video that I watched said for heavy clay soil, they recommended gypsum.
I've heard of that. We don't have much clay around here, but I have heard gypsum will help break up clay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have clay on the east side of town, but west of town, we have a geological divide. It's hill country limestone, real rocky, hilly, flash floods, everything. East of town is rolling farmland.
Another thing that was recommended as far as the biologic material, they said because of the constant has higher levels of NPK and more usable NPK combination that is usually used for helping fertilizing plants is worm castings.
Yeah, I'm sure all those things are really good. And I mix up soil in 200 and 300 gallon batches. And,
wow.
I mean, I sell plants to nurseries just because I love growing plants and I have to get rid of them. And so I need a lot of soil. And, you buy a bag of really good quality potting soil, it'll be $25. And I'm going like, gosh, that's going to cost me $500 to make my soil. So I'm honestly looking for the cheapest stuff I can get. I make my own compost. The coir fiber is pretty cheap and fluffy. Ironite's expensive. I put a lot of money goes into each batch in the form of ironite. The Thunder Dirt is a cheap foundation fill. So I really have got the cost of my dirt down to maybe it costs me 50 cents a gallon to make potting soil or something.
How are you physically doing it? What kind of equipment are you using to incorporate organic matter, everything else into your soil?
Well, years ago, I built a rotary trommel. If you look up trommel on YouTube, you'll see it's a drum that's got a screen on the inside, and you shovel stuff in one end, and it rolls around, and whatever falls through the drum ends up in a pile on the ground, and the big stuff goes out the other end. If you're really fancy, you can have different grades, and the bigger stuff can fall out later. But uh, mostly, I use it to mix my soil, and I'll dig up all the components. I'll put 1 gallon of each of the 5 components in a 5 gallon bucket, and then I dump that into this sifter mixer. And there's rocks in there that are churning around. It breaks up clumps of dirt, sticks and leaves come out the other end. And in the process, it combines it and homogenizes it. And so each bucket I put in there has got a complete set of ingredients. And I just put in, well, for 150 buckets or something like that. And then I've got enough dirt to last me for 6 months. So that I had to build that by hand. I mean, those are expensive to buy, and so you got to be pretty handy with pulleys and motors and that sort of thing. But it was fun, and it's been really useful.
Oh.
And I'm the only guy I know has a trommel, so.
Well, any other questions before we wrap it up? Well, thank you, Ed. That was really kind of inspiring how you change the momentum of your HOA and hopefully get others to follow suit.
Yeah, well, I've been fortunate that people were cooperative enough. Some people think I, hung the moon, and there's other people, I think the snake haters that just can't stand me. But
That means you've done something.
yeah, I mean, a couple of them have actually told me they're afraid of snakes, so I'm not making that up.
Yeah.
And maybe 3% of people will start shaking uncontrollably when they see a snake, and at least 30% of people would rather never see one. So it's quite common to have these fears.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I guess the more people learn, the less they fear it.
as you say, we need to delve into what the barriers are.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you so much for this. And
Okay.
I'll let everybody know that next month, third Thursday, somebody's going to talk to us about cyanobacteria and how it affects all the water bodies around us, urban water as well. So watch the emails for the links on that and hope you have a good night. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye.
Ed, I wish you had told me about that bluebonnet 25 years ago that I kept trying to grow in my backyard.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, I
Yes.
didn't have any luck. And then somebody gave me some little cuttings, not cuttings. They were sort of bare root with a little bit of soil. It came in a 4-inch pot, and it was a small plant. I thought I had it there. I had the right dirt and everything, but still nothing came up the next